0.99%. We borrowed another lot in October and it was 0.97. So just in that month, the interest rates are still coming down. So one of my things that I'm consciously aware of is obviously, while it comes down, it's great because we're obviously releasing, and as you know, and I've talked about many times in the Finance Committee, I haven't hedged for quite a few years for exactly that reason. So we're letting a lot of that sort of drop off. If we decide that interest rates are starting to flip the other way and starting to go back up, and again, from all the advice I've been given, that's not going to happen for quite a while. It doesn't take us very long to actually go and then go out and start fixing and start putting those mechanisms into place if we want to. So it's not like it'll take me months, it's literally a couple of days, us deciding what we want to do, going out and making those sorts of decisions. And then the third thing, as you kind of alluded to, we do talk about this at every Finance Committee as well. So, and you know, obviously we've got the balance, it's very much clear as far as in the P&L and what that value looks like. We've got the working capital and the Treasury piece in that report. So the perfect opportunity for you to continue to ask those kind of questions and what that sort of looks like. And obviously, as we let all of those fixed hedges come off and we bring up some of these new lendings with that really low interest rate, that working capital and that number on the P&L and obviously on the balance sheet will get smaller and smaller as we kind of go through. But this was, you are now seeing the output of some very risk decisions that was made a long time ago. And you know, even from a personal perspective, fixing your mortgage rates and things like that and what it looks like now is quite different.
So just a follow-up question on that. You mentioned the floating rate currently is 0.97% on the last loan that we got. If you were decide, and if PwC came back and said, hey, we think it's the right time to be fixing those interest rates, what's the difference between the floating rate now and what a fixing rate might be in terms of, you know, how well we're mitigating that risk now by not fixing our new loans, so by not taking hedge risk again?
Sure. So that actually depends, and that's why at the time, if the interest rates would be, that's one of the things when we go out to market. So we actually ask. That's one of we go to the various banks and we ask them exactly that question: what will you give us? What can you give us? And for how long can you give it for? So remember, time's also when we're doing that. Time's also a thing in trying to match up that debt as well. So that, and again, given interest rates are changing so much, I'm assuming that rate would change, be changing quite a bit at the moment as well. But happy to bring that back to you next week at the Finance Committee as a starter for 10 if you would like to understand that further.
And you've got to realise the reason we fix is not only just for locking those rates and its certainty, and it's about, I mean, look at your Treasury or your policy that you're signing off today is part of your risk mitigation in terms of your debt profile, in terms of protecting future ratepayers from rates increases. You know, so there's that nice balance. And the other aspect, the Auckland article regarding the losses, the fact that the elected members were surprised, probably more talks for their understanding of how it works and rather than the nature of the event itself, because what it really means is they've missed a $1.4 billion opportunity cost to not fix rather than it's a cash loss. So it's a very poorly explained article and some very poorly asked questions by the reporters of some people that weren't very well informed. So guaranteed to get an interesting outcome doing all that. Yeah,
however, they are big numbers and the big numbers, of course, create the interest as far as the press are concerned. So, and there was more than one article. I think it ran like a series for about a couple of weeks.
And basically all that says is that Auckland had a Treasury policy that said that they were going to fix at a certain level. And what the loss represents is the fact they missed an opportunity to lock it in at a lower rate. And so you can't get rid of your risk, your interest rates. You've got to pay it somewhere, and they still haven't paid it yet because it's going to go in future years. So it is what it is.
And if you remember, during the annual plan, I did come back with you, and we changed some of that hedging, and we did that piece of work to obviously get you know, our interest costs a lot lower. So, yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Bunting.
Probably just a small bit of dust under the eiderdown that needs, page 33, para 64. Just there's a little side note there, and we're talking about the borrowing mechanisms for CCOs and CCTOs. There's a wee side note there that we need to confirm the appropriate delegation for the CE to be considering stuff? Is that something we need to be doing separately, or do we need to minute it, or can it be wrapped up in the recommendations?
No, so what I'm proposing here today is that we continue to put the CE as that approver, but again, if that's not something that the council would like to do, then this is your chance and opportunity to make that change.
But he currently is that right? Yeah, so, okay, so we actually don't need to confirm it, is that right?
No, so
Right.
unless you want to change it to be something else than what it is.
Okay,
Yep.
no, thank you.
Gone, so that's it. Nobody on.
No, it was Sarah.
Good question. It was just relating to Rob's line of questioning and expanding on it. And I apologise if you've already answered this, but Auckland, I understand, fixed for 10 years, whereas some other councils fixed for 5. And I'm just interested in how far you go in terms of wanting certainty versus kind of, I guess, recognising that we can't ever fully predict the market, and it's a bit of a bet as to where interest rates are going to go in some ways. So that was just, I guess, interesting around that, how long you actually, what's been our approach in the
So a
past?
combination of all of that, actually. So if you remember in the Treasury report, which you'll see next week,
Yeah.
there's that diagram that has all the different colours in it, and it kind of goes like that. So that's obviously, that's lending that we've got and fixed for the 3 years, the 5 years, and the 7 years, and spread out. So again, it depends on, and that was a bit to what I was just meaning, in the sense that when we go out to the banks, one is obviously the cost that we would get it for, but also the term that we can get it for, and then that's when we have to make decisions. Do we do a 3-year or a 5-year or a 7-year? What does that look like, and sort of thing. And that's some of the decisions that we were making at the time when we were assessing that.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
No, is there a mover or seconder or any? Thank you, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Pascoe. We're now into debate, if there is any, and I think this is a good chance if you have any concerns to raise them in debate for the record, but no, all fine, no debate. We'll go to the vote on the board, please, except for Zoom, of course, which will be a hands up.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, everyone. Yep, no, you're up. No. Do you want us to do it again? Do it again? No, I've redone it. So start, clear it, we'll do it again, because for some reason there was a glitch.
It's weird.
Everyone voted? Margaret had her hand up last time, so that's all good. Yeah.
The motion is carried.
Sorry, item 9, which is the long-term plan significant forecasting assumptions.
Good afternoon, Mayor, councillors. This paper just is a way of introduction. As part of our long-term plan document, we have to record the assumptions that have been used in the production of that document. And these are assumptions that our auditors always like to see as soon as possible. And so what we'd like to do today is put our initial set of assumptions in front of you for your approval, but just recognising that post the auditors looking at them and asking all their hard questions, which they'll do in early January, and post additional information coming in, we expect in the new year, some of these adjustments we might, assumptions we might come back with a recommended change before we go out for consultation. Happy to take questions about the various assumptions.
Thank you. Just a question from me in respect to the Three Waters reform, which we had a good conversation about yesterday, but noting the significance of it as you do here, is it prudent or to put in here the funding gap assumptions between government's expectations and what we can currently deliver, just to forecast to people that there's a lot of work coming our way, and at this point in time we will have to rise to a funding gap. Just that whole thing about clarity with the public about the implications of the Three Waters work on the business of council and its costs.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. Maybe if I can answer that in two ways. First of all, the assumption we've put in here is the assumption that has been given by SOLGM in terms of providing consistency for an assumption across the sector. So they have come out to everyone and said, we know Free Waters reform is happening, and this has been signed off by audit. And here's a sort of an assumption that we'd like everyone to include, just to reference that. And so that's sort of the basis start of our assumption. In terms of identifying the cost to council in relation to the additional costs that we're incurring for compliance in relation to meet the Free Waters and the pressure that's putting on our budget, we will include that in our consultation document, and also you'll see that on the 9th and 10th paper.
Oh, I know, but this is for a different purpose. I just wondered if there wasn't, thank you for that clarity, and that's my full expectation that we'll be transparent in their consultation documents and so on. But in terms of this, I understand having that consistency across the sector, but I also understand, I wonder whether we should still have an additional note that assumes that there's an incredible amount of money to be found to deliver on government's expectations, whereas paragraph 12 says there's a high level of uncertainty, but it doesn't go on to talk about what the implications of that is.
That's a really good point, Mayor Paula. And maybe I could suggest that when we come back again with more information post the 9th and the 10th, so most probably in that February period, come back with an additional paragraph that we could add to this assumption.
So this won't go to them until that point in time. This is just
this just is basically why we like to get this sort of signed off by council now, is so the auditors can start looking at this and go, yes, council's signed off these assumptions. Happy to add a noting recommendation that we come back with an additional paragraph around the cost of compliance on our Free Waters area.
okay. I might come to that in debate. I'll just ponder that and see where my colleagues sit. But I'm thinking of the last sentence, which says we will continue to deliver water services, which we must, for 2021-31. But it's pretty much silent on the massive funding gap that is there to achieve that. So just maybe think about that before debate. Yes, Sean?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point, Mayor Paula. In terms of the assumptions that we've put into here, they are, by and large, they're trying to be mutually exclusive between decisions of council and external assumptions. So it's not assumptions about what we will spend or what we will do. It's more the assumptions around what the external assumptions are, that then we factor into our decisions around what goes into the draft budget. So those deliberations of the council meeting on the 9th and 10th, where we debate the draft budget, that's where sort of some of those actual decisions about what council will do are made.
So even though this goes to auditors, we have got the chance to retrospectively, once we've seen the budget, go back to them and
Correct.
say, yes. Okay, all right, let's go with that for the time being. Thank you. Councillor Gallagher.
3 questions. I may come back, but obviously there'll be questions on climate and water further, so I'm just looking at settlement pattern and citywide development, and this horrible word infill within the existing established areas of the city will be progressed in parallel with Greenfield and will accommodate approximately 50% of Hamilton's new dwellings. So that's over the next 10 years? What sort of rough, how many dwellings are we looking for so-called infill?
I'd like to ask Councillor
Councillor Beard?
Yes, Councillor Beard. GM Beard.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. So we are projecting the need for 12,500 houses over 10 years. So half of those, 6,250, yes, for full maths, will be in established suburbs. But what will happen in the course of the next few years as we step into the conversation around the National Policy Statement for Urban Development and the intensification changes that will be made through those conversations, that number is likely to change, but certainly the location of that will change. But those conversations will be brought back to you.
So
a
roughly
lot.
there's an opening assumption of 6,250.
As being built in established suburbs, yes.
Yeah, and hopefully design panel will be involved in that, because I have to tell you, 6,000 houses is now, think about it seriously, 6,000. So it just seems to me that okay, I'll save it for debate about how we qualify that assumption and explain that it's not a business as usual. The other thing too is that further infrastructure investment will be required for intensification once areas for accelerated development are identified. This additional investment will be the subject of subsequent LTPs, but obviously in this term of council we're going to be doing a lot of pre-work prior to the next LTP. It's just...
Yes, that's right. So the NPS plan change will flag where the new intensification areas will be, and there will be some requisite infrastructure investment required to deliver that. In this LTP, you will have seen yesterday that there is still a considerable amount of investment in citywide infrastructure to support intensification.
So the LTP over the next 2 years will be very much a living document, obviously, because, you know, it'll be a real time of it's not a, yeah. Okay. Now, just, okay, and I'll probably come back to that in discussion if I may. The NIDIA, where is total population at 30, and that is that's low projection, and in 10 years that's still 201,000. That's the low estimate.
Yeah, the numbers that you see are the NIDIA low population projections. So these are based on the census information that we have, and I know we've had the conversation a number of times that those numbers leave a lot to be desired at this point in time. As per the resolution at Strategic Growth, we are bringing back a report in March, so that we will have the updated numbers in March, so you will be able to consider those alongside the LTP.
That's helpful. That's very helpful. Thank you. Now, the other thing is in item 3, the city boundary change. Item 40, and this is where my good friend Councillor McPherson, who worshipped the Mayor, those of you who sit on that boundaries group, the 2021-31 LTP assumes no change to the city boundary. I'll read that again. Assumes no change to the city boundary. Now, I just want to know where I have been, or have I been in a parallel universe?
Yeah, you're in Tamaheri.
Well, well, because obviously there's an assumption here, and I'm not sure. We have... Okay.
So question understood. Elizabeth,
are you aware of previous resolutions of council, albeit previous councils?
So I think the question is, why is that assumption being made
thank
when
you,
we're
thank
clearly
you for
doing
helping me.
work?
I'm just trying to gather my thoughts. Thank you.
No, I'm on board with you.
I don't have an... Jen, can you help us at all?
Can you answer that, Jen?
So the question is, given that we are having active discussions with the councils about boundary changes, why is the assumption still stated that there will be no changes to the city boundary in the 2021-2031 period? That's 10 years that we're assuming no boundary change. Meanwhile, we're actively working on it. That's what Martin means, isn't it, Martin?
It does. Why I say is just so I've got a context, even under the Mayor Julie Hardacre Council, I seem to recall resolutions and work, certainly involving Blair Bowcott, and under the previous Andrew King Council. So, and I'm not aware that those resolutions of direction of travel have been overturned. So
so they're still there, and you see clause 41 talks about the various strategic boundary agreements are in place, Councillor Martin. Mm-hmm. What section 40 is saying is we're not including all the infrastructure requirements that are necessarily to meet the changed boundary alignment within this 10-year plan. We've based our infrastructure response on the growth requirements of our existing boundary. We have included in our 10-year plan costs associated in, for example, the work Blair's doing on the Greater Metro Spatial Plan to do the work, but not the infrastructure response. If we were to include the infrastructure required to increase the boundaries, we wouldn't have necessarily the rating base at this point in time to fund it. That will come with it. So it's not saying we're not going to increase our boundary. The assumption for the preparation of this 10-year plan is based on the current boundary, but we're still continuing to do the work in terms of looking at our boundary extensions. And when we do so, we will adjust the plan accordingly.
Just so I've got this right, maybe I'm on a different, obviously am. There's an issue of extending your boundary for an immediate foreseeable urban intensification. There's another issue of the discussion which we've had in previous councils of a boundary being adjusted to recognise immediate communities of interest. For example, once the express...
No, we're going into debate because...
Well, I'll give you an example, the HT1. I won't go anywhere near my good friends in Tamahiri. I'll give you HT1.
Yeah, but now we're getting into debate. And
All right,
actually,
all right,
the question,
okay.
I understand the question,
Yeah.
and you've answered the question. We can talk to that in debate or make suggestions to change the report.
All I'm saying, it would be a really good idea to have an appendices of all the resolutions passed so that we're consistent. Okay, I'll save it for debate. All right? I think there's two issues I'm trying to raise, is you change a boundary for urban intensification, you change a boundary because there's a natural community of interest, particularly accentuated by the completion of the expressway.
Yeah, 41 covers that off.
Sorry?
Councillor Martin, item 41 in that report covers it off.
Okay.
Yep.
But I think we're noting...
And clause 42 notes specifically what will happen if there is a boundary change.
Yeah, it just seems to me that perhaps 40 could be slightly amended.
40, 41 and 42 need to be read as one. I think it covers it.
Yeah, I agree with Martin. So let's
We'll capture that expression on your face as well in clause 43.
So I'll come to that in terms of minor changes that we all agree to. You're just going to, rather than do some sort of complicated amendment upon amendment for bits by bit, can we reach agreement that 41, 42 need to be slightly reworked to get the intent clearer? Richard, is that what you're saying?
No, it's all there. But we will make sure it's absolutely clear that we don't miss an opportunity, should it arise, to bring it back in front of council to adjust accordingly.
You can debate on that
Yeah,
and make
sure.
suggestions.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we at least understand the lie of the land on
you.
that. Any other questions, Martin?
No, I'm sure there'll be others from others.
Others from others.
Thank you. Thank you for picking that up. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you. I was reading this and trying to work out why we're doing it now and why we didn't do it 3 months ago at the very beginning of our 10-year plan discussions. It just strikes me as we're sort of up to our knees in it now, and all of a sudden the assumptions are coming out. I know it's an auditor's requirement, but wouldn't it have been more useful to do this right at the very, very beginning and say, here are the parameters that we're working to?
We have been working through these, so as the organisation has been looking at what's forward for the next 10 years, we have been also thinking about the assumptions that are driving that. So some of the assumptions, for example, you've just been having the discussions through the strategic growth committees around the population and household numbers, so that has fed into this. And similarly, some of our financial assumptions that we have in here as well, we have been developing.
Right.
So now's a good time to bring it, so that you as a council get to see it before we give it to the auditors, and recognising that there still might be further changes, as we progress through the next 6 months.
Okay, so but still, I understand that in respect of it. Wouldn't it have been a little bit more useful to have it at the very beginning, or have I got the wrong end of the stick here, Sean?
So had we brought these assumptions to you, just for argument's sake, 3 to 6 months ago, we'd probably be back here again now with updated assumptions to give more up-to-date financial assumptions, growth assumptions, etc.
Yeah.
So we would have been effectively kind of doing the same thing twice. So we felt that it's probably more efficient to do it at this point, as close as possible to the actual development of the budgets.
Okay, all right, no, thank you.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair. Just on page 54, Julie and Sean, in the graph, I'm just wondering the additional revenue, so you've got the, under bullet 44, you've got the percentage increase. The additional revenue, 4 million the first year, 4.487 the second. Is that cumulative, or is that 4 million the first year, and then that gets baked in, and then that's 4.4 on top of that? Does it compound, or is it?
No, that's for each year. So basically, that 4 million, and then that becomes my base, and then you do the growth on top of that, and then you bake that in, and then you do the growth on top of that.
Yeah, so it is kind of compounded then, because the second year, otherwise you'd only have an additional revenue of, say, 340,000, but
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess if you look at the percent, it's probably easier from a percentage perspective to say, so each year effectively, we're assuming that the city will continue to grow on a ratepayer base by 2% each year.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Chair, just a question on where the financial strategy fits in to these assumptions. I noticed the report's silent in respect to financial strategy, and I'm just wondering how Audit New Zealand will take these assumptions and the lack of an approved financial strategy into context when they do this audit later.
Yeah, so the audit will definitely look at the financial strategy. They will be, as a result of decisions you make on the 9th and 10th of December, you will decide what the financial strategy
So is that
parameters
when
are
that's going to be approved, is it? The financial strategy will be approved on the 9th and 10th?
Effectively, yes.
Okay, well, if that's the case, that answers my question. Thank you.
Masco? That's comfortable with you?
Yeah, I wasn't sure when the financial strategy was coming up for approval.
Right.
But I've been told now it's the 9th and 10th.
Yeah.
So that's fine,
Okay, cool. Dave, you look like you were poised to do something.
The debate.
Okay, cool. So we've had the questions. I'm assuming that the changes that... Oh, apologies, Margaret, sorry. You go.
Thanks, Chair. Look, again, it's difficult on Zoom, and please forgive me if I've asked a question that's already been asked. But just, there's a statement there, point 39, that I'm a little uncomfortable about, and I just wondered if whichever GM can answer it. Yes, we're making planning and making decisions based on some assumptions, get that. But then it says we will generally make upsizing contributions to developers. What does the we will generally mean, and how does that tie us, and does that tie us into commitments by developers? I'm just thinking back to the experience at Rototuna and the discussions around what council said they have done and will do, and etc., and I just wonder if we can put ourselves in a position where we say we are going to do things ahead of time.
Councillor Margaret, it's Jen here. Chris is not in the room. I feel like I can speak for him, and Richard will correct me if I'm wrong. But what this suggests is that when developers are developing an area, their responsibility is to mitigate the effects of their development. But what we do is have conversations with them about the broader needs for infrastructure on a wider suburb basis, and we upsize by agreement. We spend our money to incrementally increase the size or style of the infrastructure to meet the needs of the city overall, rather than them just mitigating the effects of their particular development.
Okay, so that doesn't mean that we commit ourselves that we will do things.
No, generally what happens... Councillor Forsyth. Generally what happens is we may well have money in our 10-year plan for a certain activity to provide a certain pipe to deliver to a certain subdivision. What generally happens though is developers usually ready to rumble before we are, ready to develop before we are, and we will negotiate with that developer at that point in time to provide the slightly increased size of the kit so that subsequent development beyond their development can be serviced at a more effective time. And so it doesn't place an obligation on us, and there's been plenty of times when we've actually haven't had the money in our 10-year plan and we've actually walked away from that opportunity. We've brought them back to council and we have voted not to contribute. But we will, and where we can, try and negotiate for that upside. It's cost effective for both of us, because effectively the overhead and the construction costs get shared in a way that's proportionate to the contribution, each proportionate contribution to the demand being drawn by that particular developer versus council and the broader community. So no contribution, and it's cost effective for both of us if we do it right.
Yes, thank you. Look, I understand that. I understand that principle, but the point that I'm wary of is that this here says that we will generally make upsizing contributions. So I'm just wondering, do we back ourselves into a corner by saying we will generally do things instead of
No.
we may or subject to negotiation and that kind of thing? I just think the way it's stated there suggests to me that we commit ourselves to doing things
Nothing in this document
for whatever good reasons they might be.
So nothing in this document commits us. Nothing in the 10-year plan in itself commits us. Anything we take development contributions for will commit us to doing something with the money we take, whether to give it back or spend it. But this document in itself is pretty benign from a commitment point of view. I'm more than happy to weaken those words a little bit, and use the word may or so forth, Councillor Forsyth. Either way, it's just to make the elected members and those reading the report understand some of the rationale behind some of our investment.
Okay, look, no, I'm happy with that explanation, just as long as that it's clear for everyone.
All right,
Yep.
so you can also extrapolate that in the debate, Councillor Forsyth, just to make sure that it's on record from the way you feel about that. Councillor Van Oosten.
Thank you. My question's with regard to delivery of service levels and additional staffing potentially around that, and to understand at what threshold either or both of those might trigger an increase.
In terms of the specifics around service delivery, they will be kind of played out through the decisions that you make in respect to the budget. The assumptions we've made in here about resources relate to the availability of resources, both contractors and staff. So what we're assuming in the development of the long-term plan is that if council decides to increase budget for more resource to deliver X, Y and Z activity or project, that those resources will be available. And so that's what we're signalling in here from an assumption point of view, but we're also kind of noting that there's a degree of uncertainty around that because labour markets and consultant markets have a natural level of uncertainty.
And I guess in terms of the level of service then, if we were to make a decision about some flexibility around that, how might that be reflected?
So that would be played out in decisions through your deliberations, either on the 9th and 10th or at subsequent deliberations meetings, where you are weighing up service delivery and service levels against budget and how much you want to spend on particular things. So that would be something which gets played out through the budget debate.
So pretty much, Councillor Mack saying this is just pretty much assuming that we can get the resource to deliver the program. What we agree the program to be and the resources associated with it gets set as part of the 10-year plan.
Cool, thanks.
It's a question more on process to the Chief Executive. What would happen if we were to want to rework this document to be more realistically based on, for instance, our discussions over the last 2 days, and not have it come back again on the 9th and 10th along with the other documents that we're dealing with then?
What particular part, Councillor McPherson? Because there's so many different aspects in this report, I'd like to be able to hone that in.
Well, don't want to I wasn't given an opportunity to look at it before it got produced here, so you've heard all the questions and that they cover quite a range of different areas. Mm-hmm. And we've made assumptions, for instance, in our infrastructure provision that are effectively having us look at our work in the Metro Spatial Plan area, not just within the current boundary. I don't see any reflection of that, for example, in here, but there's a whole lot of other things, about there's a whole lot of assumptions about what we want to fund that I don't see reflected in here in the community area. I don't want to, you know, I'm getting to the area of my speech. I'm not going to support this, but I'm going to, as it stands, because I think it's a box ticking exercise for Audit New Zealand. It's not a meaningful help to us in our work.
So can you perhaps describe again the timing issue that you have here, that you sent this now in this form, and yet I think you indicated to us that there can be changes to this post our next council meeting. How does that work? Just go over it again, please.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially what we're trying to do is separate out decisions of council or direction of council. We don't want that to be part of these assumptions that we're making here. This is meant to focus on those external assumptions that then we use to inform the council decisions that get developed. That's probably the key distinction. So in terms of what we assume the community need to be, or what we assume those kinds of assumptions, we haven't included in this document. That should they will reflect decisions of council when we're actually debating the budget proper. From a timing point of view, audit test the realism or realisticness of our assumptions. For example, our financial assumptions, our assumptions of growth, etc. Those are the sorts of things where they test to make sure that we're not assuming levels of growth or levels of revenue or inflation that are unrealistic. And so if we can agree those assumptions, then audit can start on that part of our audit prior to auditing the actual the draft budget that we put up.
You said that this doesn't reflect necessarily council decisions. How can it be realistic if it's not reflecting council decisions on the LTP sort of time frame?
So for the most part, they're the externally verifiable aspects, and so the audit process is to go through, check our assumptions against what's reasonable, not against some external measure like interest rates, how we came about with those, inflation, how we came around about those, and lock those down. I mean, for us, it provides the basic canvas level assumptions for the preparation of the 10-year plan going into it. Like all the discussions we had over the last 2 days were premised pretty much on these assumptions in terms of the numbers we put forward. So if we were to change these, depending on what you change, so if council changed its position on inflation and suggested that, actually they believe that inflation is going to be twice that, would have to argue with the auditors why we thought it was twice that. They may not necessarily have an issue with it or not. We have to provide context for it. If we changed our growth assumptions, same thing. Interest rate assumptions, if they were too far out of what they considered reasonable based on the external benchmarking, they may well lead to other challenges and questions. I don't necessarily know where they'll take it. I don't want to dramatise where they'll go with it, but they'll ask questions.
Okay, let's not get into debate about it. The question has been posed. Dave, you may vote against it and talk against it in the debate. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. I was just interested in the assumptions around the availability of contractors. It's very
Throw your coat over it, Jeff. Throw your jacket over it, that's worthless.
Is that because Sarah's so close?
Yeah. Do you want to try this seat? Here, perhaps.
That works.
Okay. I was just interested around what are the practical impacts of the potential pressure on the contractors, availability as we have more infrastructure projects potentially coming online.
You got that one? I got it. You want it? It's real. We test, we collaborate where we can. I think we went through a while there prior to COVID with the growth when it was at the early, prior to COVID when we were doing the 10-year plan and the annual plan. Initially there was significant growth estimations. We had serious concerns going through COVID when the government started talking about all the shovel-ready projects and how everyone was going to be doing these projects. Could we get the contracting companies, consultants and so forth to do the work? Now we're in sort of the mid-COVID phase. I don't think we're out of COVID yet. We're in mid-COVID phase. The government didn't spend as much money as we thought they were going to spend, and the rush on the building community wasn't as large. I do think we are in a finely tuned position, however. I know that some consulting firms, for example, laid off staff when they didn't get the large chunks of work, and now they've got to regroup, so there may well be some delays. I'm talking to Chris. I don't want to talk on behalf of Chris. He didn't raise any particular concerns in the context of getting resource, but it's definitely a worry. And we've experienced in the past, we've had to go and work with NZTA to make sure we didn't go to the market with the same with a similar contract at the same time, because effectively the market dries up in terms of the available resource as well. So it's a risk that does exist. We do everything we can to mitigate it. It's probably a shorter summary of that. We have, if you look at our deferred capital and from previous Finance Committee meetings, the majority of those deferrals have been due to the developer readiness rather than constraints in the market, is evidence of probably what the bigger impacts are.
Okay, so at this stage, the risk isn't a lot different than it has been in the past, is what I'm hearing, because we haven't seen the big infrastructure projects.
The challenges, and I will question Chris on this when we come back to the 9th or 10th, and I think the answer, I know that he's already factored it in, is the extent to which you increase your contingency to reflect the risk in the market to effectively provide the right level of attractiveness for your contract over others.
Yeah.
But the government procurement processes are designed to try to weave that sort of stuff out, if you believe what the government guidelines say, but in the end the market might well dictate what they're prepared to do the work for. But we continue to test that one, and I'll rely on Chris to give more in-depth understanding from his engagement with various contractors at the 9th and 10th so that we can re-raise that point when talking about particular projects.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of the reasons the government and local government entered into various alliance models for the building of various chunks of work is to ensure that we do, that there's multiple contractors delivering the piece of work to ensure there's enough contractors to go around in the market, as well as other synergies as well. But yeah, it's constant check.
Okay.
Personally, it's a very real concern for me.
Yes.
In terms of making sure that we get the best value for the ratepayer, and we don't have market pressures driving inflationary impacts on our procurement costs.
Thank you. And just following on from that, is probably not relevant for this report, well, maybe not, but in terms of the availability of builders for building houses, is that something that we keep a tabs on as well, or around, regardless of how many resource consents that are actually approved, are there, how many builders do we have to build how many houses?
Yep, so at the moment, well, yes, we do keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
And the team are very much also keeping an eye on in terms of the border implications, because a lot of the skilled migrants that are needed in various parts of the country for various things, there's also a group of skilled migrants. Like there's a digger school in the Philippines that teach people to drive diggers. It's one of the largest ones in the world that services a big chunk of the qualified people that drive, I don't know if they're called diggers anymore, but excavating equipment, bodybuilder style, around the world as well, and they can't come into the country at the moment, stuff like that. So there are some real impacts. But there's also a repatriation of resource going around the country as well as things dry up in certain parts of New Zealand as well and grow in others. So it's a wait and see type situation as well.
I think you've answered the question, so I'm just going a little bit into it there. Thank you for your questions. Of course, this is the first time that some councillors have come across this part of the process, so it's valid to ask a number of questions and understand what it is. Let's go to the decision. I will move it. I'm going to say I'm happy to move it. I'll move it. Is there a seconder? Deputy Mayor Taylor, thank you. And we'll go into debate. I'm the mover, so I'll just speak briefly about it. I noticed in paragraph 8, look, I know that this has got to move somewhat. There's a lot of work to be done over the next short period of time before the 9th of December. And we know that we've thrown many balls up into the air and rethought about our priorities and a number of things, but we also know that a number of pressures are coming our way, that not all of them are of our own doing. And I remain concerned, and I would have preferred, but I'm not going to hold the whole report up for it, that there was an adjustment to the words around the Three Waters reform. Because what we don't say there is that we will be relying on partnership with central government to achieve the objectives, and that's absolutely clear that we will. And yet in other parts of the report we do say that the assumptions are that this can't all be fully funded in the current way and so on. So I would have preferred that translated to the Three Waters as well. But as I say, don't really want to hold up the whole document, because I understand from the intro that this is a little bit iterative. So I won't labour the point about the Three Waters, but we know from the conversations that we've had as a team, the cost of water reform is massive to this council and all of local government, and we have to make sure that the public are aware of that from the beginning as we progress through this conversation. There are some huge infrastructural costs that we are all facing, and I think we do no one any service at all if we don't start to talk about that outright. And that is certainly a conversation that we have to continue to have with central government. I think Martin definitely picked up something of importance. The first sentence being so much sitting out on its own about boundary changes is not consistent with the actual approach we're taking at a political level. So I am expecting to see some adjustment to those paragraphs that reflects that. So that's all I'll talk to at this point in time. Thank you, Councillor McPherson.
Thanks. I understand the points you've just made, Your Worship, and to a certain extent agree with them, though I've tipped on the balance of not wanting to support this at the moment. And I think one only has to have listened to the questions and where people were coming from around this chamber to make you realise that this is quite unsatisfactory if you're thinking about what we have been doing over the last 2 days and the assumptions we were all making and the issues we were taking on board when we made LTP decisions. This exercise is a box-ticking exercise for Audit New Zealand, I would say a meaningless one, because it's not actually, and the reason that I'm sort of haven't moved a motion to try and delay it, for instance, is I don't really care whether it goes through or not, because it's going to mean, I think the words are diddly squat for this council. We're going to go ahead with our annual plan proposals that we came up with yesterday, and we're going to debate them on the 9th and 10th and come up with a final outcome, regardless of what's in this document or in this list of assumptions. This is going to allow Audit New Zealand to send some bean counters in mid-January to sign a document, and that's a process that someone in Wellington thinks we should go through. I think it's meaningless. The reason it's not relevant, on top of all the questions that have been raised, some very good ones. Paula's question was about the water, was absolutely spot on. You know, there is a qualification and an assumption that is absolutely in our minds there. Also in other areas, the assumption that Martin talked about, we are not going to be the same shaped city in a geographical sense in 10 years' time. I'm certain of that we are now. That assumption's not actually in there, though. There is a reference to, maybe it'll come up later. In terms of the funding mechanisms, there's no assumptions in there that we are going to be, apart from the waters one, which Paula has raised, there'll be IFFs, HIFs, private developer agreements, other special government funds will come on stream, and we're absolutely assuming that in quite a number of cases, and we actually had those discussions the last 2 days. I would rather see, at this time of an LTP round, a little formal document done for Audit New Zealand and a real document about our own assumptions that we have actually, you know, and the conclusions we've reached about what it's like looking forward over the next 10 years, or certainly over the next 3 years. I'd rather see that sort of document debated by us, because that would be meaningful to us. Are we all on the same page when we're making these decisions? I think this is irrelevant to that. Even when I look at the population figures, and I've raised this, I'm like a broken record on this, that it's assuming an average of a 1.2% increase in population per year over the next 10 years, when we've had a 2.2% increase. Sure, we've got COVID now and things may have slowed down. To me, this is an assumption we're going to have a pandemic every second bloody year. excuse my language, because, you know, if you're saying we're not going to go back up to the level we were before, you're dreaming, in my opinion. But look, again, I don't care whether it goes through. If it keeps Audit New Zealand happy and us able to get on with our work, I think that's, and I don't see it stopping us getting on with our work, to be honest. I just don't like voting for things that are fundamentally wrong.
Okay, any further debate? Margaret, did you want to debate? No, there is no further debate. We'll go to the vote. Oh, sorry, he wasn't there before. Councillor Gallagher.
I'm probably going to, I don't mean to be disrespectful, I'm probably going to support the chair of Councillor McPherson. I mean, obviously, well, we talk about, well, I mean, I do get grumpy sometimes with the Mayor when she talks about portfolios, but I'm warming to the portfolio approach, and I think this is the one where probably SLT might have had a bit of interaction with the relevant chair. Obviously, this is an SLT document, so obviously Jen Baird, Blair Pocock, all the other key actors are across it, and I'm just trying to work out, does it future-proof mean Metro Spatial Plan? And I would ask in future that whenever I see a chart about projected populations, I want to have the parallel and household growth. I want to have the parallel one that is urban Hamilton, i.e. within our technical boundaries, but also very clear about we become aware of what is the total population forecast for the metro spatial area, because obviously all of those households outside our boundaries use all of our city facilities. And I just can't, 40 is what it is. It says, assumes no change to the city boundary. Well, I don't assume that at all. So in that case, you know, I mean, I just think we need to be more clear and concise. No disrespect.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to the vote.
The motion is carried. 9-4, 2 against.
You win some, you lose some. It's politics, isn't it? Thanks, everyone.
Rose between two cripples.
That's the first part of our I told you so speech. We'll come back in 3 years and test these things.
Okay, so we'll move on now to recommendation, to the significance and engagement policy review.
Dave who?
Thank you, Mayor Paula. So this is just bringing the significance engagement policy to council. We discussed this briefly in a workshop earlier a few months ago. The significance and engagement policy is an important policy for council. It helps you determine whether a decision is deemed as significant under the LGA Act, and so there is we set some guidelines for that, and that's in the appendix to the significance and engagement policy. We have so that part of the policy hasn't been changed. We have left it as it has been for the last 3 years. The changes to the policy in front of you are centred around improving the words in the policy we had around engagement. So they are more reflective of this council's view of the importance of engagement with the community, and incorporates the IAP2, which is the International Association of Public Participation, approach as well. So we've been trying to incorporate that a little bit clearer. The significance and engagement policy is a two-step process. So you just deem something significant, and then depending on the level of significance, you consider the level of engagement you want to. This policy doesn't lock council into any particular position around engagement. You always have the opportunity to decide to engage on something.
That's a good question. Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, just a question on how you decide significance. some of it's clear cut and there's a whole stack in the middle, and you see sometimes when we go, for instance, to the Regional Connections Committee or the Regional Regional Transport Committee, you see Regional Council putting something out for consultation that we would absolutely think our existing policy covered if it was with us making a decision. I mean, the Local Government Act doesn't seem to give much of a lead for quite a big chunk. So are we in a position where an issue comes up and it's not something we've done before, but it's sort of you could say, well, that's just an extension of what you did 3 years ago, that we don't have to sort of get too tied up about whether it needs to go out for full consultation. I think that's a confusing or a grey area.
So I think there are two parts to your question, and if I don't answer them, please correct me. So in terms of significance, every council has to have a significance engagement policy. The Local Government Act in itself doesn't set a lot of rules around the thresholds that you can set. That's entirely up to the council, and that's why in our significance and engagement policy we use that table of trying to be really clear to the public about how we go for a whole list of things and then come up with a calculation of whether something's significant, moderate or low significance. In terms of engagement, again, there's no rules in the Local Government Act. It basically says council can decide what it wants to do around engagement. We've tried to, in this document, put a little bit more structure around the engagement part of it, so you'll see a table similar to what we have in the significance section to try and identify generally to give what we have to do under the Act is actually try and make it clearer for the community to understand when council will make a decision or how it makes a decision about engagement. So we've tried to put a little bit more structure in there, but left it very much that it is a council decision.
So it's political at the end
Yes.
in those sort of areas.
Yep.
That's really, I guess, what I'm asking about. You can think, okay, a couple of individuals may think this should have full consultation, but across the whole city, if the council decides that it's not, then it's not, then that's okay.
Yep. Can I, and just on the, if we've done something prior and we think we're making tweaks to something, one of the criteria we use in assessing significance is consistency with a prior decision. So if we've done something in a certain way or decided something previously and the new decision we're asking you to make is consistent with that, then that would sort of have that kind of scores low on on that criteria.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you. So just so I understand what you said there before, I appreciate the intention of this and the matrix you're putting up, which gives us some good sound reasoning, but if something comes up that we hadn't anticipated, like i.e. rhododendron lawn, for example, we can still make a decision to consult. Is that right? This doesn't bind us.
Absolutely.
Great. But it doesn't apply to the likes of resource consent, like the Flagstaff thing where Mayor Paula was trying to get Kaingaora to consult publicly. It's a different issue, yeah?
Well, there are certain situations under which you're obliged to consult, either through the RMA or through a special consultative process, which is stipulated in the legislation.
Yeah.
So where we have to consult, then obviously we do. This policy applies to, I guess, the discretionary situations where you're not legally obliged to, but this sort of sets the framework for where we would where and how we would choose to.
Right, so they're kind of two different processes, is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, all right, thank you.
Councillor Gallagher.
So I'll just use the Founders Theatre as an example, because it's not RMA, but I mean, obviously, as I understand, in an LTP and AP, there's, a significant quantum of money, all right? If we're doing a new sewerage system, we do it. The Founders, to a degree, there was a nuance there, and then it was multi-layered. It was a formal hearings, which was coming back to council, I chair, but we also had the website and other engagement. There was a multi-layered. Would that be an example, if you like, of a... I mean, could we have not engaged on the Founders?
That would be something that we would have needed to work through to there was obviously a reason why you did decide that you wanted to engage. And one of the key requirements under the Act is about, do elected members feel they know and understand the views of the community? And that's often one of the key reasons why you do go to engage. So you make sure that your constituents have that opportunity to share their views with you, so you understand their views of the issue.
Because you see, if I'm looking at the Government Act, right, I get, just correct me if I'm wrong, I get if an annual plan or an LTP, anything that is major, we have to by law formally go through a formal process of a hearing. But then, of course, is there still a financial threshold? Because that's an interesting...
So our significance and engagement policy does have a whole range of criteria in it. Some of it is financial threshold. Some of it is the understanding the views of the community, the consistency with previous decisions, and also whether you're talking about an asset that's deemed as a strategic asset, and those are defined in the policy as well. To answer your question about could have you chosen not to engage about founders again?
I'm just, it's a neutral question within the law.
Entirely up to council to make that decision.
Right.
To keep, I suppose the advice that staff give elected members this time is to make sure that we keep everyone safe. And the question that gets asked is, has the community had the opportunity to inform council of their views of the issue? And so that's often a really good reason for going out for consultation.
So that but then becomes a political judgment based on advice and our own judgment, sort of that. And then, if I get this right, then the second part of that is a multi-layered consultation process.
Yeah. So the tools that you can use when you do engage are multi, and we have tried to include these in here as well to give a bit of a view. You would have noticed over the last couple of years that we now use a number of tools around our social media that we didn't report previously. So the way you engage is entirely up to council and is very much dependent on the issue and how we want to engage. So it's very flexible. The tools you use are not prescribed in the Act.
Sure, thank you, that's helpful.
Okay, any further questions? Councillor Hamilton moves, Councillor Wilson seconds. We'll go into debate. Any debate? Councillor Hamilton is the mover? No. Councillor Gallagher? Yeah, no, I've got it. Councillor Gallagher and then Councillor Bunting.
Thank you. As the portfolio holder or chair of hearings and engagement, let me officially use my official position to actually, in this case, praise our staff team, yourself, and obviously the comms team. And what I'm observing, this is a bit of a historical observation, is I have become increasingly impressed over the last few years at just that, what I call that multi-layered consultation. And also I respect that what that mitigates is being captured technically by the loudest voice. I'm not being disrespectful to loud voices at all, but it's the deep down dive, and also if there's even a local kind of facility, for example, the Steel Park, there was some stuff there. So you're actually getting in and just doing the mixing with the community. I certainly acknowledge consultation and giving opportunities to key sector groups across the whole community. So I think personally, by and large, the quality of work across this council is significantly good, albeit we come to debate on certain issues that but that's a separate issue. Thank you.
Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, look, I will support it and thank the staff for their work, but I will say, when it comes down to it, as elected members, we are the ears and the mouths of this community, and sometimes, as we've seen in the past, this system, with all the best intent can slip through, so I'm comfortable that there's the opportunity to take decisions back to the community, which is cool. I desperately wish it had more teeth. With respects to the resource consenting and the Flagstaff Kaingaroa thing, I wish we had the grunt to say take it out, because we think we'll take it out to the community, but we are still stymied by that. There's only a certain amount that Mayor Paula and the likes can do when it comes to asking them to increase their engagement. But, work in progress. It's something I'll try and find a way of getting into the district plans down the track. But thank you for your work. Happy to support.
Thank you. I'll just say this is a very good report, and there is a little bit of difference between the communications engagements approach that we're talking about in how we reach out and involve our community in having a voice, and the legal and process requirements around engagement and significance, which is very different, although the terminology is not very useful. But it is good, I think, that Council, through their discussion, retains the privilege and the opportunity to decide what's significant to the community at some level, so that we as governors can determine how we talk to our community on the key issues. So it's been moved, it's been seconded, let's go to the vote. Margaret's there, so that's cool.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Okay, let's go to item 11, recommendations from the open committees. Do I do them one by one? No. Right. Economic development. Councillor Hamilton.
Mayor. Yeah, it's as per the report, but we have got an additional further motion that we'd like to put forward. And it's just really just following the process whereby the draft domain endowment fund policy was approved by the Economic Development Committee, so we're seeking obviously formal approval as full council, but also that the domain met with the group MEF working party and felt that it was probably appropriate that that sat under community, given that its legislation is around parks and reserves. So it's just really a tidy up around those two policies and formalises the work that we've been doing to date, which needs formal council approval, and I'm obviously happy to move it and seconded by Councillor Ewan. Happy to talk, any questions about it or anything?
There are no questions. It's pretty straightforward, it's procedural really. So you've moved, Councillor Hamilton. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Let's go to debate if there is any.
But and certainly not debating against it, well and truly in support of it, makes a lot of sense. We have had discussions amongst us, and I appreciate the collegial work from Ryan and Ewan in this one. It's been fantastic.
Can you just speak up a little towards the mic, because I can see that Margaret is struggling to hear. Is that right, Margaret? Yep.
Excellent. It's been a long time since I've been criticised about my mic technique, so this is fantastic. Thank you, I appreciate that. But I'm grateful to the work that's been done by the Economic Development Committee and the working group as well. The intention is that we set up a similar structure, which at this point we intend to involve the Chair of Finance, the Mayor's Office, and the Chair and Deputy of Community to have a parallel type group that works specifically towards the Domain Endowment Fund. So I'm grateful for this. Thank you.
Kapai. Thank you. We'll go to the vote. Oh, yep. What? No, she doesn't. Did you want to speak, Margaret? In or out the meeting? I thought she was trying to. Is she voting or is she not? Do you know what I mean? Just procedurally, just get that correct. Well, she's got to vote though if she's in the meeting. Sorry, don't mean to be nitpicky and technical, but
legitimate, technical, picky.
Did you get my vote?
Yeah, we got your vote. Thank you, Margaret. We can see you. We just can't.
Counted it twice.
Yeah.
Forsyth.
We're messaging her. Do you want to run and see if she? Otherwise, she comes out of the meeting. Is she? Sorry.
By the hand, by the hand.
Thank you for your vote, Sarah. We appreciate it. All right, thank you. So move to resolution to exclude the public. Councillor Bunting moves our second. All in favour? It's carried. So we.
Just a note.
Aye.
Councillor Mark, just to make it really clear, that's the first time you heard any feedback about your mic technique. Because when you're on the radio, no one can give any feedback.
Okay.
Yeah, it's my performance review when that comes up, eh? I've got your back.
So we've only got the confirmation of the excluded minutes, which we'll quickly go through one by one, just in case there is anything. And then we've got the one item about the Hamilton Medal. So we'll be able to move through this pretty quickly, I feel. Item C.
Jinx it.
Shh. Item C1,